faith was premised on the concept that everything, virtually in the universe, is amenable to scientific understanding.
Newton's work has a beauty and a simplicity and an elegance that makes it the greatest work of science ever known. But what Keynes found shattered his image of Isaac Newton. For in these manuscripts, Keynes discovered an Isaac Newton unknown to the rest of the world. An Isaac Newton who seemed obsessed with religion and devoted to the occult.
He is known today as a sort of a high priest of the age of reason, but this is a misconstruction of Newton.
The modern interpretation of Newton is about as far as can possibly be from what Newton himself thought.
On the one hand, we can recognize him as a scientist, but on the other hand, he's pursuing an activity which we now label as a pseudoscience.
Now, scientists and historians are trying to reconcile the Isaac Newton they thought they knew with the Isaac Newton they're discovering in his private papers.
Our project now must be to see Newton the way that Newton was, rather than trying to see Newton the way we want him to be.
What are these mysterious documents revealing about one of the greatest scientists ever? Newton's dark secrets, right now on Nova. In a library in Jerusalem lies an intensely curious document. It was written about 300 years ago, and only a handful of scholars have ever examined it. The author was arguably the most important scientist of all time, a genius who uncovered the law. Laws of physics that govern the entire cosmos. Sir Isaac Newton. The subject, Newton's calculation of the date the Bible said the world as we know it would end in the Battle of Armageddon, the year 2060.
If this calculation were correct, then we are close to the time of the end. That's exactly what this sort of calculation would point to.
When this document came to public attention recently, it was headline news. But why was Isaac Newton making this dire prediction?
We find it surprising that Newton sounds like a televangelist talking about the end of time. We only find it shocking because we've made Newton something that he's not. We've made Newton an irrationalist, enlightened image. That's just not Newton.
What these manuscripts reveal is a very different Newton than most people conceive of. This is a Newton who is not a cold, calculating scientist. This is revealing a Newton in all his glory, warts and all, if you will.
So who was the real Isaac Newton? On a small farm in rural England called Woolsthorpe, the conflicted life of Isaac Newton began in 1642. That same year, the astronomer Galileo had died, and his work was still sending shockwaves through Europe. Galileo had risked his freedom by challenging the ancient belief held by the Catholic Church that the sun moved around. Based not on faith but observation, he confirmed the Earth was just one of several planets orbiting the sun. dawn of the scientific revolution, an age when science and reason would redefine the world.
There was a sense of a whole new era. The very idea
Hope you're as
of
excited
having
as I
the
am.
empirical world
This is one
answer
of my
our
favorite
questions.
parts of the job.
That idea was taking hold in a way that it almost never done so
The
before.
first step is simple.
And from
You
a
have to
young
learn.
age, Newton was gripped by this new outlook. As a boy, he pored over a
Give
book
us
called
your
The Mysteries of Nature and Art, a manual for building mechanical contraptions and investigating the natural world.
Just
He
go
was
ahead.
preoccupied by the things that preoccupy physicists, by time and motion. So he made windmills, he made little boats, he flew kites that supposedly affrighted the locals.
This is everything I
And they were
have.
put up and they thought that they
You're
were
really
comets.
going to.
But from
Welcome.
the start,
You've made
there
a
was
great.
another side of
I want
Isaac
you to
Newton.
know this is all going on your bill.
His father
So,
died
here's
before he was
level
born, and when he
Repeat
was
this
just 3
mantra.
years
I
old, his
deserve
mother remarried and
better
moved away,
life.
leaving
Once
young
you
Isaac
truly
behind
believe
with his
that
grandparents.
innermost self,
Newton
you'll be
later
ready
confessed to
to.
such rage, but he wanted to
I
bury his
deserve a
mother
better
and
life.
stepfather
A
in
better
their
life
house.
is coming. A better life is almost here.
That's it, neighbor.
And
Keep
by
it
the
up.
time he left home for Cambridge University, Newton had lived through 2 decades of violent political and social turmoil. The bloody Civil War, the beheading of the king, and the restoration of a monarchy under Charles II in 1660.
Hey, something I can do?
That's all.
Sure,
At
sure.
Cambridge, Newton buried himself in his studies.
Can't you already feel your life is changing for better?
It's the offspring of silence
Hello, neighbor.
and unbroken meditation.
Hey there.
What is it, neighbor?
He didn't go anywhere. I mean, he rarely traveled. He
How
never
will I
went
know
to the
when I'm ready
continent.
for level
He was
2?
that
Oh,
insular.
you
I mean,
know.
he stayed in his
Good
rooms.
things will start
He
to happen.
worked
You'll see.
7 days a week,
You just have to
18
keep
hours a
working
day,
on level
and he
1
pushed
until
himself,
you
drove
get there.
himself. He had a library of his own that had about 60. Or 1,800 volumes, but it was very much a
What is it?
world that came to him through printed
I just
matter
need to
or
thank you.
through manuscripts.
Becoming a
from
pro.
others.
Thanks. Just keep working on level 1.
Atmosphere of Cambridge was something
What is it?
the reclusive young Newton wanted no part of.
Never mind.
It was a time, particularly after the restoration of Charles II, it was a time of great fun and frolicking. And
Hey there.
I think Newton
I'm
would
so
have been
glad you decided to
dismayed
join
by
us.
many of the antics of his fellow students, drinking, going after bad young women in local villages.
Hey.
Can't you already feel your life changing?
To resist temptation, Newton drew up a plan that he'd stick to for the rest of his life.
The way to chastity is not to struggle directly with incontinent thought, but to avert she thoughts by some employment, or by reading, or meditating on other things, or by converse. For he that was thinking of chastity
deserve a
will be
better
always
life.
thinking of women.
A better life is coming. A better life is almost here.
He's a very
Excuse
silent,
me.
Welcome.
thoughtful young man who, I suppose, looks as though he's utterly tedious from the outside. There's no evidence, I think, that anyone liked him at all, apart from his friend John Wickens.
John Wickens was another Cambridge student. He and Newton became roommates after both grew unhappy living with students who put
I'm
pleasure
so glad
before
you
work.
decided to join us.
They have a very peculiar relationship because Wickens is somebody who is of a higher status than Newton at Trinity and seems to have become Newton's amanuensis, i.e. secretary,
Hi.
over the following
What is
20
it?
years. But they
I
must
need
be
my
very
stuff
close.
back.
They lived in the same rooms for
Or
20
else.
years.
There wasn't really a money back.
As a student, Newton developed the latest scientific ideas. It was widely accepted by this time that planets orbit the sun. But now the question planets move? What held them in their orbits? The most popular theory came from the French philosopher René Descartes, who thought of the universe as a giant machine, like a clock. Descartes said everything, even the orbits of planets, could be explained simply as the physical interactions of parts of this machine. But Newton had trouble accepting this view of nature.
Newton's a very smart guy, and he became convinced that the only types of statements that are acceptable are ones which you could, to put it bluntly, test in the laboratory.
But just as Newton was probing the limits of Descartes, the plague struck England. Thousands died every week. The university closed, and Newton returned home to avoid infection. And it was here, in the apple orchard just outside the family home, that the legend of Isaac Newton was born.
The story
Hey,
is
you
that
dropped
he's
something.
lying in the garden, thinking about how it goes around the earth and so on. And an apple falls. And the story goes on. He suddenly has the idea that it's the same thing between the apple falls.
Newton told this tale himself at his old age, claiming that when he falls from that apple, he realized that the planet's is not a mechanism like Descartes' clock, but any reason he was convinced that the force of pulling apples down to Earth and keeping them moving around the Earth were one and the same. He stayed up late in the evening calculating the strength of the force by the rapid fire. But when the numbers didn't quite work out, he put the idea aside. Or so the story goes.
I doubt that an apple would stimulate him to get the idea.
I don't think it's even known whether it ever happened.
I'm extremely skeptical.
Alright, let's find out about this pillar. Because it doesn't seem that killing the main leader, Missionary Andrew, closed any missions or anything.
Captivated Newton at this time. Italian scientist Galileo had proved in a famous experiment on motion that all
This
objects
is not the safe file I wanted.
pick up speed or accelerate downwards at the same rate, regardless of their mass. And finding the average speed of a falling object was a straightforward process. For example, if you want to find the average speed of an apple falling from a tree, all you have to do is divide the distance the apple travels by the time it takes the apple to fall. But Newton was not satisfied with the average. What would be the speed of an apple which is constantly accelerating at every point along the way?
You need calculus
What
for
would the
that.
apple's velocity be halfway to the ground? To find out, you can measure the apple's average speed over smaller and smaller periods of time. The shorter the time interval, the closer you get to knowing the apple's speed at that moment. But to find its precise speed at a single instant, you have to reduce that time interval as close to zero as you can.
Newton invented a way to make that time interval infinitesimally small. What is infinitesimally small? That is smaller than any number that you can think of. It's not zero, but it is smaller than any number that you can think of.
Seems this place doesn't exist anywhere else other than Fallout World 2. See where we start this quest at. Imogene Takes a Lover. Cabot House, Third Rail, Charles Street Amphitheater. Edward Deegan. Let's discover where Edward Deegan's, alright, let's see special delivery quest. It seems I need that one before I do this. Cabot House. Alright. I just gotta find the Cabot House. Mana mana. Do 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 do. Mana mana. Do 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 do. It seems I haven't discovered it yet. Maybe. No? I've not discovered it yet. Let's go over there and find it. Let's see. It's right over here.
I hope you decide to become one of the pillars of the
How about you go shove it up your ass, lady? Oh, damn pillar of a community. Look for gold, bitch! Speaking of which, I'm a little tired of this font. Switch it up. Making the color gold. There we go. Like solid gold brick right here. Woo! Motherfucker. Bitch, I will shoot you in the head. Pow! 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 Come on. I know you're here somewhere, Mr. Mysterious Stranger.
My head.
Come on, I just want to hear the Mysterious Stranger. Just want the Mysterious Stranger. Why is that so hard to ask for? Can't wait till I level up. And he comes out like every 5 seconds. I was like, "Pow! Mysterious Stranger! Pow! Mysterious Stranger! Pow!" It's gonna be fun because you click a button and then, like, he just pops out of nowhere. It's like, "Hi guys, pow pow pow, I am here." Why can't I run? Oh. Fucked up the game. Too much VATS action. Woo! Look at this rendering. Holy hell, what the hell did I do to my game? Oh my god. The game can't do it. It's like, shit, man. You're in the buildings. The game's like, shit, man. We ain't got no hope for your ass.
Front door. Rob.
This is private property.
Yeah, but it's just private property. And look, I'm inside it. Oh man. Oh, it rendered it. No, not completely. The game is the game is glitched right now. I sure hope it don't save. But man, oh Barry Manilow, is this funny? Hey Nick, you coming out to see the beautiful glitchedness? Look, I'm inside the buildings. Oh. Why are you shooting at me, Art? You just like that? You just like me protecting myself? What the hell is wrong with you, man? Here, you gonna help me take out these sentry bots? Hopefully this fixes my game. Back to science.
For the first time, it was possible to calculate quantities that are constantly changing, like the speed of a falling apple at any particular moment, or how a planet's position changes over time.
Derivatives.
This technique, Newton invented an entirely new branch of math called calculus. And that changed all
Fucking
science.
derivatives.
Looking at the world changed because of calculus, yeah.
Calculus was a quantitative understanding of the way things change. Not just velocity, but in physics, chemistry, even in populations. How fast is a population changing over time? This mathematical framework becomes the language in which modern science is formulated.
Today, calculus shows up everywhere, from analyzing the stock market to modeling global climate change.
By the time he was 20 years of age, working on calculus at Wolfstar, he was the greatest mathematician the world had ever seen, and yet no one knew. Only Newton knew it. It was his secret.
This was a guy who calculated computation of every kind. One of the things that you can see in those manuscripts, for instance, is there are places where you'll find he's calculating logarithms out of different places. Because he needed it, because he liked doing it. It was a pleasure to him to do that sort of thing.
And if that weren't enough,
And this is why you need the limb damage.
accepted wisdom about how colors are produced, performing an experiment on himself with a large needle or bodkin.
I took a bodkin. I put it between my eye and the bone, as near to the back side of my eye as I could. And pressing my eye with the end of it, so as to make the curvature in my eye, there appeared several white, dark, and coloured circles.
Fortunately, Newton found a safer way to investigate light and color, using a prism.
Newton, you crazy, yo.
Aristotle to Descartes, scientists thought sunlight, or white light, was pure. Colors were produced by physically modifying white light, which they believed passing through a prism did. But Newton decided to see for himself. Sending sunlight through a prism, he produced the spectrum of colors. And then he went one step further. He sent the red ray of light through a second prism. Instead of making a new color, it remained red. Newton concluded that white light is not pure, but a combination of all the colors of the rainbow.
He thought of the prism actually as a separator of the objects that are all in the original light. This was very hard.
Alright, this area of the game isn't rendered yet.
Because it meant that when you're looking at white light, you're looking at something which has all the colors.
I think I'm in an area between patches or something.
And indeed, frankly, it's counterintuitive to most people today.
Only 25 years old, Newton had made some of the most stunning breakthroughs in the history of
I'm gonna have to
science.
go back.
But he kept them almost
Like
entirely
way back.
to himself, just as he had done with calculus. After the plague subsided, he returned to Cambridge, where he worked his way up to an appointment as the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, the position held by Stephen Hawking today.
Cool.
Newton became known for his prematurely white hair and for his long-winded lectures on light.
That belongs to refractions. As can be found in their demonstration of a certain physical hypothesis. Not well established. I judge it will not be unacceptable if I bring the principles of science to strict examination.
The introverted Newton had little time for students, and they had little interest in him. Years later, one of Newton's laboratory assistants would recall,
There were so few went to him, and fewer that understood him, that oftentimes he did, in a manner, for want of hearers, read to the walls.
but Newton's study of light was about to start a revolution. 50 years earlier, Galileo had built one of the first telescopes. It used glass lenses to gather light from distant objects and focus it for the observer. But this kind of telescope had a problem. Its lenses produced fringes of color around the edges of the objects being observed.
that the objects that
Swan ain't nothing but a bitch. I see that shit. Swan spawn. Shows in like 3 seconds. Look, I'm gonna drink his water. Fuck you, Swan. Curious power fist.
A remarkably and radically different kind of telescope from anything that had been built before.
Drink some more of this water. Mmm. Tasty. More. No fear. I never have fear. Look at this raider. He walked up to Swan. That's why you died. That's why you died. That's why you died. Don't die. Look.
Magnified about 40 times in diameter, which is more than any 6-foot tube can do. I've seen within Jupiter, distinctly round, and his satellites.
It was an instrument that has left its impact on astronomy ever since. Our huge telescopes of today are built on this model. They're gigantic versions of this tiny little thing. These are the telescopes that sit on the top of the great mountain peaks. These are the telescopes that we launch into space to peer into the deepest parts of the visible universe.
I got 6 health. Alright, I got 6 health. Let's calculate this. 6 health. How many rads? 2, 4.
The effect that it had on Newton's contemporaries was immediate and dramatic. It brought Newton onto the world stage.
Got 2 rads. 2 health and rads now.
Overnight sensation.
5. This doesn't even make mathematical sense. 5.
Most of them were awed by the whiz kid from Cambridge, and Newton was so delighted that he promised to send the Royal Society a paper he had written on his discovery that white light is
Plus 3 rads. What's my health now? Still 5. Let's go take some more rads. This is bullshit. I'm gonna get to 1 fucking rad.
His private notebooks reveal that the same year he became a professor at Cambridge, he bought 2 furnaces, an assortment of chemicals, and
Still 3. Still 3. Got 2. 1 HP. There we go.
By carrying out lengthy and complex chemical procedures, alchemists tried to produce a magical substance called the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was so potent that even a small quantity was said to perform miracles.
I am G-O-O-D good.
Immortality and transforming ordinary metals like lead into pure gold.
In the 16th and 17th centuries, there were many, many people who came to courts in Europe and claimed that they possessed the Philosopher's Stone. And they were employed by nobles and princes throughout Europe to make gold.
In some instances, it was immensely profitable. You could milk a duke or prince of a substantial amount of money, no question. But if you got caught, it was extremely dangerous. We know that one of the customary punishments for defrocked alchemists, as it were, was to be hanged on a gilded scaffold. And sometimes they were forced to wear suits of tinsel as they were hanged to make it a public spectacle.
As Newton immersed himself in alchemy, his paper on light was igniting a firestorm in London. The job of evaluating Newton's ideas fell to another Royal Society member, Robert Hooke, who would become Newton's lifelong nemesis.
The paper got published, and Hooke wrote a report on this, and it's a peculiar report, because effectively speaking, what it says is, I accept all of Newton's experiments, but whatever is new in them, I already did, and all of his claims are wrong.
For 4 years, Newton and his critics fought it out. with blow after blow published in the magazine of the Royal Society. The sensitive Newton was mortified. Newton was allergic to criticism. Really allergic. He went off the wall when people criticized him.
The problem for Newton was having anybody question what it was that he had done. He didn't want to tell anybody about it in the first place. But if he was forced to do it, you sure better believe what he said.
He cannot convince as many people as he wants that what he said is true. And that defeat, if you like to call it that, was very bitter for him. Then by the mid-1670s, he's withdrawn completely from the international world of science.
Newton vowed he would never publish a scientific paper again. In the isolation of Cambridge, Newton threw himself into alchemy. Alchemy had been outlawed because the British government feared that frauds would debase the currency with fake gold. And for years, controversy has raged over why Isaac Newton took up alchemy.
I mean, I'm interested in
His
alchemy.
lab assistant was baffled.
What his aim might be, I was not able to penetrate into. But his pains, his diligence, as those times made me think, he aimed at something far beyond the reach of human art and industry.
In the past, many scholars dismissed Newton's alchemy as scientifically worthless.
And yeah, we can make alchemy today, but whatever.
Taking a second look. To find out what Newton was really up to, Bill Newman has begun deciphering Newton's coded recipes and recreating alchemical experiments Newton did 300 years ago.
If we want to figure out what's going on in these laboratory notebooks, that's the way to do it. Actually try the experiments and see what happens.
Newton believed that in the distant past, people knew great truths about nature and the universe. This wisdom was lost over time, but Newton thought it was hidden in Greek myths, which he interpreted as encoded alchemical recipes.
In some instances, he interprets the myths.
I mean, he himself
in a very, very exact
did
ways
hide
that
things.
correspond to actual recipes.
But getting these recipes right
Everything
is
here
no
is
easy
worth
matter.
what I charge.
Like all alchemists, Newton concealed his ingredients in bizarre-sounding terminology.
See?
Our body, God's compounded, is called our Hadnafna. Being of two sexes, and it is both father and mother to the stone.
He used very colorful language that's typical of the alchemy of the time. For example, he talks about the green lion, the sordid whore, and the minstrel blood of the sordid whore.
And they sell just about
These are
everything.
terms that have very specific reference
I've got a
in
few minutes to
17th
browse.
century alchemy.
Everything.
One of Newton's recipes, called the net, comes from the writings of the Roman poet Ovid. In his poem, The Metamorphosis, Ovid tells the story of the god Vulcan catching his wife, Venus, in bed with the god Mars. According to the myth, Vulcan made a fine metallic net and hung the lovers from the ceiling for all to see. In alchemy, Venus, Mars, and Vulcan mean copper, iron, and fire. Viewed this way, the myth becomes an alchemical recipe. And if Bill Newman has interpreted the recipe correctly, he should get the same results that Newton got 300 years ago. A purple alloy known as the net, which was believed to be one step towards the Philosopher's Stone.
Behold, the net. It worked. A purple alloy with a striated net-like surface. Worked perfectly.
By recreating these recipes, Bill Newman is finding that Newton's alchemy contained key elements of modern science. It was a systematic process with results that could be reproduced and verified. And historians have also discovered that Newton was not alone in pursuing alchemy. Other scientists of the day, including members of the Royal Society, were alchemists too. Perhaps Newton's alchemy was less an occult practice than another way to investigate the natural world.
Alchemy was really matter theory. Alchemy was a science which pursued the most basic questions of what is the earth, what is all of the universe made up of, what are the components of matter.
There was a profound element to the practice of alchemy which really makes it deserving of being called early modern chemistry. He's not a madman playing around with strange spirituous substances. He's trying to actually figure out how to change material particles around to get one thing out of something else, and that's not so weird.
Newton's alchemy came as a surprise when it was discovered in the papers bought by the economist John Maynard Keynes in 1936. But other manuscripts now housed in Jerusalem contained an even greater surprise. For most of his life, Newton held a dangerous secret. As a fellow at Trinity College, he was required to become a minister in the Church of England. But this was something he violently opposed. Newton became convinced that the central doctrine of Christianity, the Trinity, or the idea that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit were all equally divine, was not true. The more ancient Christian texts he read, the more he believed Christ was the Son of God, but not God's equal.
Now, because Newton was so convinced that God is extremely powerful and unique, Newton, as the saying goes, reads himself into heresy. In other words, Newton begins to minimize, to play down, eventually to deny the divinity of Christ.
And Newton comes to the conclusion very early on that the Trinity is a blasphemy on the first commandment, because the first commandment says that thou shalt have no other gods before me, and the worship of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, from Newton's point of view, is a heresy.
It is.
But denying the Trinity was illegal, and Newton was risking everything by holding these beliefs.
If Newton had been exposed while he was at Cambridge as an anti-Trinitarian, his career would have been over. He would have been ostracized. It's almost certain that it wouldn't have involved being put to death, but definitely prison would have been one possibility.
Newton was eventually excused from becoming a minister, but he wrote more about theology and alchemy than science and math combined. Only recently made available to the public at the National Library in Jerusalem.
Sure.
These documents are now revealing that for Newton, religion and science were inseparable. Two parts of the same lifelong quest to understand the universe.
Newton himself wanted to design a universe in which God was absolutely present and absolutely powerful. There's an enormous irony there. In the 18th century, gangs of interpreters, most of them French, will take the God out of Newton's world. It's a very common image of what the Newtonian world was. It was soulless, it was mechanical, but it really wasn't theologically motivated at all.
Now, ironically, that's very anti-Newtonian, because Newton argued that God had to be present. You couldn't read him out of the universe.
The most beautiful system of the sun, planets and comets could
Hey, Solomon.
from the council and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being.
Uh-huh. Let's see what you got.
He owned more than 30 Bibles, and he examined them as rigorously as he did the natural world. Correlating biblical passages with astronomical information, he redated ancient history, drawing up elaborate charts and chronologies that show civilization starting around 980 BC.
I have hundreds and hundreds of pages of computations and workings and reworkings where he tries to probe this over a period of close to 30 years. Time and time again, he'll come back to it, calculating and recalculating, trying to make it work just the way he tried to make his theories of light work.
With the same fervor that he brought to science and math, Newton also combed the Bible for keys to the future.
What he was trying to do is determine when the end would come, when Christ would return, when all the apocalyptic events of the end times would come to a head.
And that date is now alarmingly close. The year 2060.
Newton is not a man who keeps his theology in a box that he brings out only on Sundays, and then a man who does his science as a working man the rest of the week. Newton sees his work as a seamless unity, and his project is to understand the truth of God.
Most people today think of religion and science as completely different spheres. In Newton's day, science, the investigation of the natural world, was a part of religion. It was all questions in some ways ended in divine knowledge.
Alchemy and religion might have continued to dominate Newton's thoughts. But in his early 40s, he received a surprise visit that would refocus him on physics. It was the astronomer Edmund Halley, now known for the comet named after him. He asked Newton an esoteric-sounding question about planetary orbits.
My question is this. What kind of curve would be described by the planets, supposing the force of the attraction toward the sun to be reciprocal to the square of the distance from it?
An ellipse.
An ellipse? How do you know?
I've done the calculation.
You have? How did you calculate it?
I'll show you. Should be here somewhere.
He can't find it, and then he says, I'll give it to you by the week.
Don't worry, I will redo the calculations. I'll send you a copy.
Halley's question lies forever. Through years of observation, scientists had discovered that the planets move around the sun not in perfect circles, but in slightly elongated elliptical orbits. But no one could explain why. Halley and many other scientists had begun to suspect that the planets were attracted to the sun by some kind of force. They guessed that this attraction became weaker with distance in a mathematical relationship called the inverse square law. For example, the inverse square law says that if a planet is twice as far from the sun, the gravitational attraction it feels is 4 times weaker. But no one had been able to prove this resulted in elliptical orbits. Several months later, Halley received a paper from Newton. It was Newton's mathematical proof that a planet obeying the inverse square law of gravity must travel in an elliptical orbit. Newton may have used calculus to arrive at this, but he had not published this new form of math, and his proof was written in the traditional language of Euclidean geometry. But Newton wanted more than a mathematical proof. He wanted to know how the planets move through space. For the next 18 months, Newton worked on this question day and night. He barely ate. He barely slept. And he saw no one.
When you look at what he did during that time, it's difficult to believe that any one human being carried out this amount of novel mathematical and mathematical physics research.
Finally, he submitted a 500-page draft of his masterpiece, the Principia Mathematica, to the Royal Society for publication.
I tried reading it, I can't understand it.
Bar none. It is the most magnificent work. It is the most all-encompassing work. It is the most daring book of any scientific treatise ever written.
After the publication...
And also written in a different language.
Newton is the man.
Mathematica Principia.
I mean, you know, very few people can understand what this thing is about. but a lot of people can see there's something important in here.
See?
What people saw was that Newton was providing
Newton was insane.
for understanding the universe, building on
Beautiful mind,
its predecessors.
but insane nonetheless.
Galileo had spent years studying motion on Earth and determined that projectiles always follow a curved path called a parabola. But Galileo believed that motion of celestial objects like the moon was very different.
Galileo still believed that there were differences between the terrestrial and the celestial. He retained the idea that was ancient, that motion was different.
If you want to help us out, hop in the pool and gather some tar berries. I'll pay
He
you
thought the
a
same
cat for
laws
you
must
to
govern
bring me
motion on
berries.
Earth and in the heavens.
You bring me tar berries.
To demonstrate this, he would have to devise a set of laws so powerful they could explain motion everywhere. He began the Principia with a set of ground rules.
Damn, baby. You can give me anything you want.
An object in motion will remain in motion forever, unless acted on by an external force. An object's rate of acceleration is proportional to the force exerted on it. And for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. These laws allow scientists to make such accurate predictions about how objects move that they are still used today to send rockets into space and explore other worlds. But explaining the orbits of the planets required another ingredient. This brought Newton back to the work he had begun 20 years earlier.
Hey there.
Gravity.
Make yourself at home, friend.
To show how gravity works on Earth and in the skies, Newton designed a thought experiment. He imagined firing a cannon from the top of an extremely tall mountain. From his first law of motion, he knew the cannonball would travel in a straight line at a constant speed forever.
Welcome to the slum.
But gravity pulls the ball downward. If its speed is low, the cannonball hits the Earth.
Welcome to the slum. We're the only
higher
tar
the speed,
bog in the
the farther away the ball lands.
So what do you think of it?
If you throw it faster, it comes farther away.
It's pretty close.
Faster,
The Tarberry bog out of an old
even
swimming pool.
faster, it may
No
go
kidding.
1,000 miles.
It's a good-looking
Even
drop
farther,
to
it
lose.
may actually go
appreciate you
almost
saying
halfway
so.
around
When I came
the
across
Earth,
this
and
place,
there hit the
it
Earth.
was the first time I'd seen anything. You probably noticed it's only dual.
If its speed
I used
were
to
high
live in Dodging
enough, the
City.
cannonball would travel
I decided
all
that
the
we
way around
girls should
the
have a
Earth
place where
and settle into orbit.
It looks like you've done well for
The
yourself.
cannonball
It's a
around
good
the Earth
start,
was a
yeah.
balancing
I'm proud of
act
our work
between
we've
the
done.
cannonball's
Look,
tendency
what
to
if this
fly
place
off
could
in a
be
straight
more than
line
just a
and it's
wrecking
being
shop?
yanked
What if we
back
could
towards
also
the
be
center
an
of the Earth
example of what we
continuously
can
by
do?
the force of
We want
gravity?
this to be a
So
place that
in
everyone looks
Newton's
forward to
picture
visiting.
of the world,
Maybe we
there
can make people
were
take a
two
second look,
things.
you know?
The natural
Maybe then
tendency of
they'll
an
see
object
that
to
we
travel
know
in a
us.
straight line, which was true on Earth,
I think it's a
or in
great idea.
space, or
Yeah.
anywhere. And
Thanks
there
for
was
saying
the
so.
attraction of
I'll just take a
gravity,
look around.
which was true on the surface
Here's
of the
always
Earth,
looking
and it
tricky.
was true
It's been
up
good
in
talking.
space.
Newton's breakthrough
On the
was to
inside,
see
we
that
ghouls
the
aren't
rules
so
around
different from everyone
the
else.
Earth and a cannonball's motion on Earth were governed by the same law of gravity.
That is a beautiful way of persuading you, me, and probably his colleagues that cannonballs falling to the Earth and the moon falling to the Earth is one and the same law of physics, gravity. The moment that he realized that, almost everything else follows from that.
Newton reasoned that if gravity governed motion on the Earth and the Moon, why not on Jupiter and its moons, which he had seen with his reflecting telescope? Why not the entire solar system? In a bold leap, Newton proclaimed that this invisible force operates everywhere in the universe.
It's an incredible leap. It's beyond anything anybody had imagined at the time.
Newton called it the universal law of gravitation, and he wrote it in one simple mathematical equation.
It's so important because it really tells us how nature operates in a fundamentally new way. Newton is saying the same thing that is going on in the heavens is going on Earth, and vice versa. It gives us a guidebook to answering the age-old question of what causes the rise and fall of the tides. It gives us answers to the orbits of the planets and their positions. It's a tremendous act of intellectual triumph, one of the great keystone, cornerstone pieces of our intellectual heritage.
Yeah, it's nice. Really nice.
You got an eye for them too, huh? It's a genuine getting up butter. The 2000s, it's a shame.
Therefore, the universe, whatever
Don't
the size of the
suppose you
universe
have.
was in those days, and therefore the way we think about ourselves.
Of course.
The Principian showed a promise that gravity by itself could account for virtually all the motions we know of in our planetary system. And the rest of science to this day has built off of that foundation. Newton turned out to be more correct about that than he could possibly have been confident of.
But Newton was not able to enjoy his success for long. As soon as the Principia was published, Newton's old rival, Robert Hooke, claimed he had come up with some of the key ideas first. And later, others attacked it because Newton did not explain what gravity is, just how to calculate its strength. Newton himself didn't understand it. How can this object attract this object? There's nothing in between them.
That seemed to them as going back to some sort of an occult philosophy.
In fact, some think Newton's idea of gravity was related to the occult practice of alchemy.
You look like a man who could use some fresh supplies. What do you say?
Another time.
Newton was fascinated by an alchemical process called
caps,
the vegetation of metals, in
All right.
which inert metals seem to come to life and grow like plants. Today, we know this is just the reaction of mercury and silver with a solution of nitric acid. But Newton thought these kinds of reactions showed that mysterious, invisible forces he called active principles